First, let's start with this case. My father-in-law is staying with us for 3 weeks over the holidays, which I already find to be an overly long visit, but I decided to let it go. He informed us that he was planning to drive up this weekend from Florida and mentioned that he expected to arrive around 1 a.m. When my wife asked him what time he thought he might be arriving, and he said 1 a.m., I responded that this was not acceptable. I suggested he either adjust his departure time or stop along the way to rest in a hotel. We have 2 young children, an 8-month-old and a 3.5-year-old. The guest bedroom where my father-in-law will be staying requires him to pass by their rooms. The last thing we need is him arriving at such a late hour, making noise and disturbing everyone's sleep. My wife was speaking to her father and gently pushing back on his plans. I remained quiet until he said something along the lines of, "There's another way to look at this. A man coming to visit his family." The tone implied that we should feel fortunate to have him visit. At that point, I felt compelled to speak up and said no, 1 a.m. is unacceptable. He responded, "You're entitled to your opinion," which escalated the conversation. It became heated, but eventually he agreed to arrive at a more reasonable time. Now, however, my wife is trying to make me feel guilty, saying I was too harsh and implying that I was the bad guy for insisting on a normal arrival time. Am I in the wrong for setting this boundary? Let's start judging. It feels like there is more to the dynamic. To me, if my parents or my in-laws were arriving at a late hour, my husband or I would wait or wake up to greet them and help them get settled. Neither set of parents would be loudly bumbling by our kids' room and waking them up. I don't know if your kids are extremely light sleepers, your walls are paper thin, you're ill, an excessively loud man, or a combo. Or maybe that's not really a key issue here after all. Not sure. I'd rather our parents come to our house than head to a hotel at such an hour because I'd worry about them. I don't know how long the drive is, and am taking it in good faith that Phil has logical reasons for the drive time. For my fam, more relatives fly versus drive. We are a close family and everyone tries to find the most convenient travel times, but also sometimes ticket costs and such lead to odd arrival times. For us, no biggie. We adjust. But that's built into our family dynamic and may not be built into yours. I'd also love 3 weeks for a visit. That feels like a treat. But again, I recognize my family dynamics aren't necessarily that of others. Ultimately, it's your and your wife's house, so you should jointly decide this matter. I'm curious about her take on all this. If she is unhappy, as you say, guilt-tripping you into being the bad guy, there may be more to it than we can see here. For instance, I'd be upset if I welcomed my parents' arrival at whatever time and my husband was overruling me, so to speak. I'd also be upset if my husband spoke to my parents in a disrespectful manner, even if the general message was one with which I agreed. Not saying this is what happened in the scenario with your wife, we don't know that. But noting that there may be reasons why your wife is upset that aren't about inconveniencing your FIL. I hope this smooths out and you can enjoy family time, OP. Take care and happy holidays. How fragile are you and your kids that drone walking past a room is an unacceptable disturbance? The tone of your whole post sounds like you don't want him at all and you're reaching for excuses. Why is everything so unacceptable? Your wife doesn't seem to have a problem with it. My buddy drove around 8 hours to see family, and he got in at like 2 or 3 a.m., and all they did was have one family member stay up to wait for the arrival while everyone else slept. They weren't upset about the arrival time. They were excited he was coming to visit. I don't understand the issue. If there's an agreement that that is a late time to show up, only one person may be awake when FIL shows up, and he needs to be quiet since everyone's asleep. The biggest annoyance would be if y'all had to work the next day, and this was way too inconvenient, and then I'd be inclined to agree. But going through the house late at night doesn't seem like a big enough deal to have arguments over it, cause a scene. Next up, my husband and I live in a 3-bedroom apartment. We use the master bedroom for ourselves, and until earlier this year, the other 2 rooms served as a guest room and a shared office space. In October, we welcomed our first child and decided to convert the guest room into his nursery. We considered sacrificing the office instead, but ultimately we decided the office was more essential for us. I work on site but also take on freelance projects from home, and my husband has a hybrid work schedule. While we don't need the office to work, it provides a more organized and calm environment, especially now that we have a baby. On the other hand, we rarely have guests, and when we do, the office is large enough to accommodate a mattress on the floor. My father, who lives in another country, is traveling here for Christmas, and this will be his first time meeting my son in person. The last time he visited, I was pregnant, and we still had the guest room, so he stayed there comfortably. A couple of weeks ago, my father called to ask if he could stay with us during his visit. I said yes, but explained that we no longer have the guest room, so he would need to sleep in the office. He asked for clarification, and I told him we'd converted the guest room into the baby's nursery. He then asked why we hadn't gotten rid of the office instead. I explained our reasoning, but he became frustrated and said, "Whatever, I'll get a hotel," before abruptly ending the call. The next day, he texted me saying that it was selfish and inconsiderate of my husband and me to prioritize an office we don't actually need over having a proper guest room. He added that I wasn't raised to be such a poor hostess and claimed it was unreasonable to expect anyone to sleep on a mattress on the floor. To make things more complicated, my sister is siding with my father, and now I'm starting to question whether we made the right decision. Am I in the wrong here? Let's start judging. You're not in the wrong. A guest room is nice to have, but you have reason enough to use that space otherwise. In fact, to not do so could be a waste of space. Surely your dad also taught you not to waste resources. As for sister dear, does she live nearby to you? Maybe she's afraid dad will hit her up, or does she live far away and was figuring on using your guest room for some free lodging of her own? You're not in the wrong. WFH wasn't a thing when your father was in the workforce. Nowadays, a home office is a must, and it sounds like you and your husband both use it. While it is great to have a dedicated guest room, it's also crazy to have a room in your house that is almost never used, just in case someone comes to visit you. If the space permits, I'd consider getting a nice, comfortable pull-out sleeper sofa for your office. But a plan to have guests stay at a nearby hotel is perfectly fine. You're not in the wrong. A home should be set up for the best interests of the people who live there. You and your husband both regularly work from home. Sure, you could make do without the office, but it would be awkward and inconvenient for you both. It's quite absurd for someone who isn't paying any part of the rent or living there to expect you to suffer routine inconvenience in your own home year-round, to better be convenient for them a few days a year. Next up, I'm a 27-year-old woman currently living with my dad and his wife after a recent separation, while I save up to get my own place. In my bedroom, I have a poster from the popular show Stranger Things, the Hellfire Club one. Recently, my stepmother brought it up as a problem for her. She told me, "This is a Christian household, and the devil poster in your room really bothers me. I need it out of my house." Initially, the part of me that tends to keep the peace was willing to go along with her request. But then she added that she planned to replace it with a painting of Jesus, essentially decorating my bedroom to suit her preferences. For context, I was raised in a Christian household, and I still align with many Christian beliefs. However, the poster has nothing to do with worshiping anything sinister. It's simply about my love for the show. If she had watched it, she'd know that. It's been a couple of weeks now, and I haven't taken the poster down. At this point, it feels like a matter of principle. I had to uproot my life and leave my home to move back into my childhood house. Something I didn't particularly want to do, but I'm grateful to have the option. That said, does being in her home mean I, as an adult woman approaching 30, need to change my personal space just to make her happy? What about my happiness? What about my independence? Am I in the wrong here? Let's start judging. You're not in the wrong. I just saw you say you were paying rent. That is your room. You can hang up whatever you want. Can I ask what denomination you were raised? Because even though there is zero context, I'm getting a big Baptist energy from your stepmom. People like her aren't even worth the energy. If you're paying any rent, you can decorate it as you please. You're not in the wrong. If you're not paying rent, she views you as her guest in her and your dad's home. I would just take it down as like I said. People like her aren't worth the negativity they bring. But she's a major idiot if she tries to put a Jesus pic there to stare at you in perpetuity. You're not in the wrong to refuse that. After reading these comments, I can agree that my own stubbornness is one of my biggest liabilities. It does make me seem childish for arguing over principle when they've been kind enough to offer a place to stay while I get on my feet. More than likely, I will take the poster down, but I draw the line at her decorating the space for me. Seeing as how I do pay rent, I think that's fair. I mean, I'm open to hearing if I'm wrong on that, though. Next up, I'm a 15-year-old girl who used to be very close with my cousin, who is 17. Last year, she had her daughter, and since we're close in age, I've always tried to support her, especially during her pregnancy and her struggles with her relationship with the baby's father. I've spent a lot of time with her daughter, taking her on outings and helping out. So when my cousin asked me to babysit one evening while she went out with friends, I agreed because I care about both of them deeply. Initially, everything went fine. My cousin told me she would be back by 11:30 p.m., so I wasn't worried. However, she didn't show up at the agreed time, didn't call, and wasn't responding to my messages. Since her daughter was asleep, I decided to wait, assuming she had lost track of time. Hours passed, and I began to worry since it was completely unlike her to disappear without communication. I tried reaching out to her friends and checking her phone's location, but she had turned it off. This was strange because she always shared her location with me. Finally, at around 3 a.m., my cousin sent a text saying she was staying over at a friend's house because it was late and she didn't want to pay for a taxi. By this point, I was exhausted and upset. She had left me completely in the dark and essentially turned the babysitting arrangement into an overnight responsibility without consulting me. If she had communicated her plans, I might have been okay with it, but it felt unfair for her to assume I would stay without asking, especially since I'm only 15. At first, I tried to manage on my own, but her daughter woke up crying and wouldn't settle back down no matter what I tried. Overwhelmed, I decided to call the baby's father for help. I explained the situation, and he came over with his mother to pick up the baby. I texted my cousin to let her know where her daughter was and stayed on the sofa for the night, planning to leave in the morning. When I woke up, I hadn't received a response from her, so I went home and told my parents everything. They supported my decision. Later, my cousin called, furious, accusing me of betraying her by involving her ex and saying I had dragged her daughter into the issues between them. She hung up on me before I could fully explain my perspective. A few days later, she sent a long message blaming me for breaking her trust and expressing how hurt she felt. Since then, I've been bombarded with messages from her friends and even my aunt, saying I should not have contacted her ex and should have just stayed overnight. I'm confused because her daughter regularly sees her father and has stayed at his house before, so I thought calling him was the best decision in that situation. I also never agreed to babysit overnight. Was I wrong to call her daughter's father instead of waiting it out? Or was I right to do what I did? Edit. Some additional details for clarity since a few people asked. My aunt and uncle, my cousin's parents, were away for the weekend, which is why my cousin went out in the first place. I also didn't call my parents that night because I panicked and thought it was too late. Update. Thank you all for your responses. It's been really reassuring to read your opinions. I realized I didn't explain everything clearly in the original post since I was upset. So here's some clarification. The original plan was for me to babysit until 11:30 p.m., then go to sleep at her house while she took over. But when she didn't show up, I couldn't just go to bed with her daughter in the house. Not knowing where my cousin was, I'm very close with my cousin, and it's normal for me to sleep over at her place, which is why my parents didn't check in during the night. In hindsight, I should have called them, but I didn't think of it at the time. I chose to call the baby's dad because I was overwhelmed and thought it made sense to contact the other parent. I've known him for a while, and he often came to their house before the breakup. This morning, I spoke with my mom, showed her the messages from my aunt and cousin's friends, and she's planning to talk to my aunt to sort things out. I also blocked the friends who were sending me messages. The baby's dad sent me a kind text thanking me for calling him, which made me feel better. He mentioned that he and his mom are considering asking for more custody, which might be why my cousin is so upset. I sent my cousin a message explaining that I understand she might have issues with her ex, but in that moment, I felt calling him was the best option because I was out of my depth. I haven't heard back from her yet, but I don't expect a response anytime soon. Thanks again for the support. I won't be babysitting for her again, and I'll update if anything else happens. Let's start judging. You're not in the wrong. Your cousin was taking advantage of you. No responsible mother would fail to answer her phone when her baby is being watched by someone. If there had been a medical emergency, that would have been too much pressure on you. I am thinking your cousin didn't tell you that she was planning on staying out all night because she thought you might have refused to watch her child. Her behavior was totally irresponsible. You tried to get a hold of her, and when she didn't answer, you called the baby's father. She is acting like you just went home, leaving the baby alone in the house with the front door wide open. You did the responsible thing. Don't let their comments upset you. She is just feeling guilty and probably embarrassed for setting you up for an overnight babysitting without warning you. You broke her trust? Hun, she broke yours. You're 15, had no clear communication, no way to see when she'd be back until super late in the night. Honestly, I don't think I would have been able to have had such a clear mind at 15 to contact her ex, among the stress of the lack of contact, the baby crying, etc. You were responsible, did the right things, still kept a mature sense of mind through all of this. Honestly, even though I don't know you, I'm proud of how you handled everything. What I don't like is how your cousin, aunt, and cousin's friends are basically harassing you, making you out to be the bad person in all of this. Don't let them drag you down, though, or let them make you think that you did wrong. Them being upset at you makes no sense to me, especially since P has been at her dad's house before. Because of this, you being told that you're dragging P through your cousin's issues with her ex makes no sense to me. You're not in the wrong. I hope this'll all wind down soon and you'll be able to relax and not deal with this any longer. You're not in the wrong. Ask her if she would have preferred you to call the police and had CPS visiting her to investigate child neglect and abandonment. She never should have left you hanging until after 3 a.m. and to not respond to your calls and texts. What if something bad had happened and a medical provider needed her to make medical decisions? If she wanted to stay out late and party with her friends, she shouldn't have had a baby at 16. Now she's a mother and she needs to grow up whether she wants to or not.